You're listening to the Awakening Woman Ready to Thrive. I'm your host, Florence Agpabi, and this is your space to return to your truth, your rhythm, your power. Let's begin. Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the Awakening Woman podcast, Ready to Thrive. Today, I am so excited to have two amazing, powerful women guesting on this episode from Women Are the Medicine. If you are on Substack and you are interested in the feminine, female empowerment, then you've probably come across their work. So hi, Rachel, and hi, Nasreen. I'm just going to open up this space for you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Florence. It's amazing to be here. I'm Rachel, one half of Women Are the Medicine, and we're both coaches. We both coach predominantly women, but me personally, I have a background. All the stuff I've done ever has been around change and sort of why we all say like we want to change, but quite often we don't. So that has I've worked in loads of different places. I've worked in strategy, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in organizational design, and now I work with NAS, with women, and Women of the Medicine is all about, enabling all of us as women, because we've all got medicine to give to the world, but too often that's sort of stifled within us and it doesn't see the light of day. So we're all about empowering women to bring that medicine out, because the world, let's face it, really needs it. Naz?
Yes, thanks, Florence, for having us on. We're also really excited to be here and share our message. So, as you said, I'm Nasreen El-Marish, and I am also a coach. My background is in event management and PR and wellness retreats. I started doing luxury retreats, yoga retreats overseas for quite some time, and then naturally made the transition into coaching and took up the specialism of relationships, because you always teach what you know, right? I went through my own relationship transformation, which was completely mind-blowing. And I'm still with the same guy. I married him, 22 years in now. So with that focus on relationships, I expanded that into working with women, looking at their relationship primarily with themselves, but also to their partners, and then to the, whatever they want to call it, the divine source, that thing that is greater than themselves, and really like to play in those realms. And then I met Rachel whilst doing a psychedelic integration training program for coaches, and they put the two strange British women together in a jungle hut in Costa Rica on our retreat experience. And I just massively fell in love with her brain, with her sense of humour, with her mission, and it just felt really natural as we started to spend time together. And our origin story is quite funny. But as we started to spend time together, we decided that we'd go into business together, because we wanted to collaborate, and it just feels incredible to be able to do this work with such a wonderful partner.
I feel like you do work beautifully together. Just through that introduction, it really comes through to me. Like, Rachel is so grounded, and just the strategy and the brain, like you said, Naz, and that comes through in your words on the on Substack as well. Just really rooted in empowering women, but not kind of like in the woo-woo sense. Really very much in, okay, this is the practical stuff, this is the real stuff that you have to, this is the systemic stuff that you have to kind of untangle and deal with. So really like that feminism arm of it. And with Naz, I really get like the feminine aspect with you, that kind of like the relational, like the inner knowing, the awareness, the connection, the kind of the unseen elements that are really important to be able to deal with the systemic structures and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I can definitely see how you two work so beautifully together. And I had the pleasure of talking to Nasreen a couple of weeks back, and yeah, it was such a brilliant conversation. So I know I have high expectations. No pressure, ladies. I have high expectations of this conversation anyway. So, you both seem like you have a story. It feels kind of like, okay, so you were in marketing and you were in events, and then this happened, and psychedelic integration happened. It's like there seems to be like some missing pieces. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you feel that it really connects to the idea of awakening?
Yeah, Naz, did you want to
Yeah, sure.
you want to go first?
I'll go
And then
first.
yeah,
And it's quite interesting how we have very different experiences, but there are some parallels in our journey. And, it's interesting because for me, I didn't really think I started waking up until I started to see my behavior in my relationship with this wonderful human being that I'm now married to, but my behavior is being quite destructive, and I could tell that something had sort of hijacked me and hijacked my emotions. And so it's when I started to do work on myself and start to take charge and think, you know what, it doesn't have to be this way, that things started to have a bit of a domino effect. And this self-development journey, as we know for so many of all of our clients, is so addictive, but in a great way, right? Once you start peeling back the layers, you're like, oh my God, how many layers are there? And as we know, it's infinite. You can keep going and going and going. But it really is can be such a joyful experience of transformation, even through the challenging times. And so for me, I really started to, when I worked on myself and my relationship got better, I started to think, oh wow, what else could get better? What else is mediocre in my life? Where else am I compromising? And the work that I was doing, although it was interesting, and I was working for a charity at the time, so it felt very selfless, which was my good girl conditioning, it wasn't 100% fulfilling me. So I really started to question and look at some of the ways that I was not acting in integrity or in alignment with what really mattered to me. And it was probably about a decade's worth of work, and it's a gradual accumulative change to really sort of properly awakening into my power. And one of the most transformational things for me was microdosing with LSD, which I'd happened to read a book called A Really Good Day by Isla Waldman, who talks about she started taking LSD for her mood disorder, and lo and behold, she started to feel a little bit brighter and her marriage started to improve. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Where the hell am I going to get hold of some LSD? And happened to meet someone at the gym who used to be a chemist in that field and was able to source some really high grade LSD for me. So I started microdosing very ad hocly. I didn't really know what I was doing. And over the space of a summer, I noticed that, yeah, my relationship was getting better and yeah, my mood was getting better. But you know what? I was also, because I was focused on aligning what I did for my life's purpose with what I really wanted to do. So I was kind of in that space of looking at what do I want to build going forwards. I was in my, I would say, late 20s, early 30s at this point. I started to take some really big risks in the work that I was doing. Things that I was like, wow, this is quite unusual for me. And just noticed that my anxiety had lifted and some of the barriers the obstacles that I put in myself to the things that I wanted started to be removed. So I continued to do work on myself. I did some more coaching. I did a coaching program training me how to be a coach. And then it was when I, probably about 5 years in, I thought to myself, this is so brilliant. I've got to bring in psychedelics into my work. And that's when I did the coaching program that I met Rachel on, which was all about really deeply looking at how psychedelics can help you not necessarily just heal from trauma and help with depression, but Rachel and I were really started to look into those other areas that psychedelics can be a catalyst for, such as authenticity and courage and creativity, and that's really what sort of lights us up. So that's where I met her, and then I'll do a quick sort of spiel about Women Are the Medicine, which was we came back from our trip to Costa Rica, and we knew that we wanted to see one another. And so we decided to go to London to see an exhibition called The Divine and the Demonic Feminine at the British Museum, which was amazing. But of course, being us, we decided that we were going to take a relatively small dose of magic mushrooms just to enhance the experience and see what happened. Well, what happened is we completely ruptured our sort of patriarchal viewpoint, and we stood behind the system of patriarchy as we were going through this exhibition and another exhibition at Stonehenge, where we were almost like able to see the moving pieces of patriarchy and capitalism and all the ways. We'd just been to see this divine and demonic feminine exhibition, so we were filled with the energy of Pele and Lilith and Green Tara and like these amazing goddesses. Powerful. So there was definitely something guiding us that day to have this experience. And when we came out, we realised that actually there's something that we can do. We don't just need to sit here passively or sit here and be angry with how the system doesn't serve us. There's something that we can do. And it was a deeply, deeply empowering moment for us as we were eating our Thai food after this experience and going, right, we're going to change the fucking world. And that's the mission that we still follow through with today.
Amazing. There's already so much there, but I do want to hear, Rachel, your experience.
Yeah. So so I'd always been working in and around change and interested in that. But I guess my sort of personal journey was that I kept experiencing, what I know now to be the symptoms of CPTSD. So when life got really, really stressful, I would go into this complete sense of emotional meltdown, dysregulation. And part of this was also to do with the fact that I'm neurodivergent, which I also didn't realize until relatively recently. But I had these like really overwhelming symptoms, and actually that is what led me in the first place to psychedelics, because at that point I was already coaching, and I was actually doing a training where they had a guest lecturer, amazing. They had Bessel van der Kolk lecturing, who is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, and is one of the world's preeminent experts in trauma. And so it was a great big training program. And somebody asked him, okay, there are all these different ways we have of treating trauma. If you had to like say what's the top one, what's the most effective way to look at trauma? And he said, oh, well, that's easy. It's MDMA. And I was like, collectively, we were all on Zoom. You could see everyone's mouths drop. Like, did he just say what I thought he said? So, and this is quite a few years back now. So it was sort of before the current resurgence and interest in psychedelic research had really got going. I was like, this is very interesting. So I started researching it. And long story short, I actually did my own kind of MDMA therapy work, which absolutely shifted so much for me. It was an amazing reset, to the point that it seemed absolutely magical. But that, of course, got me very, very interested in, like, I really want to know more about these substances. And I started microdosing. And the interesting thing, I think a little bit like Nas says, we hear all this stuff about microdosing. Oh, it like just makes life feel easier and you have more energy and a better mood. And some people experience those benefits, and that's great, but they're not guaranteed. But I would say the one thing that does seem more or less guaranteed when you start microdosing is that you really start noticing what just isn't working in your life. Like Naz says, like, oh, I've done this, sorted out my relationship. What else isn't working? So as I started microdosing, I became increasingly aware of how much I hated my consultancy work that I was doing, and how that really wasn't, I was doing a lot of work, basically growing profits for companies that I deeply disliked. And that's putting it mildly. But also just the life I was living at that point. I was living in London. I had a huge house, a huge mortgage. I was kind of running on the hamster wheel. It was just like money in, money out. It was just like, hang on, what on earth am I doing? What am I doing? I don't want to be living this life. And it's not like I'm getting anything for it. I'm just kind of in the machine. So yeah, a lot of things started changing quite rapidly in my life, and the work that I do, and where I live, and the relationship I was in at that point. There was a real sort of process of shedding and reorganizing. And yeah, and that led me to this same training that Naz did, because I was like, this is an amazing, amazing tool, these substances. If you think about the fact that, as I said, with women, we all know like women who have extraordinary strengths and gifts, and are forever sort of like, oh, it's, yeah, but maybe I'll get around to that at some point, or I don't feel ready yet, or we're just like, this is something that it would be so powerful to bring into coaching work with women, um, in order to help us rewire that conditioning that keeps us a cog in the machine, so that we can do something about it and hopefully build something that is, that is designed for us and by us instead of off our backs. So that's kind of my story of waking up and looking around and going, no, this isn't good. This isn't good. I'm not playing along with this anymore. And thank God, ran into Naz along the way. And it's a really lovely, rich partnership. I think we are quite complementary.
I can definitely see some threads in what you both have shared. And I think what's coming up for me is the word permission. Just this idea, I mean, it had different flavors for both of you, but I think like with Naz, it was kind of permission to be you, that authenticity bit. But you also talked about creativity and courage as well. And Rachel, that was there for you too, but it was more in the sense of, no, this isn't me, this isn't my life, And also you spoke about the anxiety bit and the complex PTSD, and how it helped you to begin to, yes, the mood aspect, but it felt like there was something more as well that was given you.
I just don't think I'd ever really realized how much I was masking within this system. And I was masking in a lot of different ways. I was masking as a neurodivergent person, desperately trying to pass as neurotypical, as a lot of neurodivergent women do, and therefore don't get don't get picked up by the system, because the system's trained on, this is what it looks like in men, but fails to see that women, because we're conditioned to tune in to what's around us and what's expected of us, that we become extremely good at masking. I was masking trauma symptoms, but actually a lot of my trauma symptoms were, I mean, I was living with a really high amount of anxiety, for example. And I sometimes think, I mean, women, we suffer more from anxiety and depression than men. And I think part of that is because that's the system that we live in, but the system also benefits from our anxiety. The more anxious we are, the more we feel like imposters, or that we're going to get caught out, or that we should, hide away and let others have the limelight. That serves the patriarchy, and it serves capitalism. So it was a really interesting process for me, because I just didn't know any of this stuff until I would say, in my late 30s. I had no, if you'd said to me, but like, are you unhappy? What would you have instead? I'd probably have been like, oh, like, life is good. I've got all the sort of trappings of what capitalism tells us we're meant to have. Everything looks fantastic. But yeah, then realizing it was kind of just mask upon mask upon mask. And that tapping into, I mean, this is something as well Nas is very eloquent on, but I was just shut off from what I really wanted, my true desires. If you'd asked me, I would not have been able to tell you what it was that I really wanted. We see this a lot with women on our programs. Like, well, what do you want? I don't know. Apart from rest.
Yeah, rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that it links to is that connection to the body as well. Because if you think about it, it's operating at the level of the brain and the nervous system, and obviously the neurochemicals as well. And so, like, for me, when I'm coming up to my time of the month, and on my time of the month, so on my flow, I'm very, very much attuned to things that I don't like, things that bother me, things that aggravate me. And it all comes out without a filter. It's just like my tolerance level really goes down, And I feel like when you spoke about masking, even that, actually, that's PMT, that's PMS, right? You get angry around your periods, and that's a label on it. You're the problem, because actually, no, your personality is not supposed to change. But actually, is it really changing? Or are we actually just more connected to our truth at that point in time, and we're giving ourselves permission to say it? Our body is giving us permission to say it, because all of a sudden our neurochemistry is doing this weird and wonderful thing, and it comes out before we even know it. Most of the time we mask by cleaning and all the ways that we've been taught are acceptable forms of dealing with our inner world. And I know from my perspective, my story, I grew up in a Nigerian African family, and that came with its own cultural expectations about how to be as a Black person, as an African person, as a woman. I was the first child, and there were certain things that I was raised to believe about how you can express yourself. And then obviously in Britain as well, there's stiff upper lip, there's all this other things that we're taught to be. So you learn to kind of mask and express yourself in that box of like what's acceptable depending on the society, culture, whatever it is that you've been raised in. So yeah, I can definitely understand what you're saying. In a nutshell, that's what I'm saying.
I really love. I'm just at the minute. I'm just finishing an article about consistency and what consistency actually would look like if we imagined it through a female lens. But I love what what you're saying is so true, because really in society we should have a really good balance of masculine and feminine. But what we have ended up with, because we live in a patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist society, is that we have devalued the feminine so much, devalued also women's biology. And we live in a society that is totally designed around this 24-hour cycle that is the cycle that men have. Testosterone levels go in a 24-hour cycle. And you sort of see that it's almost like that kind of consistency, that way that I would say patriarchy has universalized that. It's like that's the only way it can be. Like you've got to be consistent, you've got to be like the same energy levels, the same amount of work, doing the same stuff, discipline, day in, day out, get to the gym, hit your, it's exhausting for women to try and fit into that, because that is not how we work. We're on a 28-day, more or less, cycle. I mean, I'm menopausal now and I'm still in this, it's interesting, still very much ebb and flow in terms of energy levels and inward, outward. And it just doesn't work. But, biologically, there is a good reason for what you're saying, that what we experience, say 1 week out of every 4, is that we call bullshit. We call bullshit and go, this isn't working, that's crap, let's sort it out, get rid of it. And actually, if you don't have that's a natural check to all of our lives and work and companies. And you can see what's happening. We've got a system that doesn't have that kind of check. It finds it very hard to say that things aren't working. And it's kind of on this cancerous trajectory of growth, growth, growth. And, anything that goes against that is not okay. But yeah, so women actually calling it and saying this is crap and getting irritable. Um, I mean, I think there's a good reason. We could put that to better use, right?
Yeah, definitely. There are a couple of posts that you've put out on Substack which have really touched me. And I think one of the key ones, we've spoken about it quite a bit, or you have, Rachel, is this idea of patriarchy. And I've really wanted to understand, okay, so where did this come from, in your opinion? I hear people talk about patriarchy so much. Um, and I would love to hear your perspective on what you feel it is and where it comes from.
I mean, I don't think it comes from a single source. It's not like there was one moment when patriarchy emerged. It has emerged and keeps emerging continuously. So one of the places that it emerged here in the UK was, and this is I've written about. This is not me saying this. This is an amazing scholar called Sylvia Federici, who talks about this in her book Caliban and the Witch. But she talks about how patriarchy emerged and capitalism emerged in the UK, which wasn't the UK at that point, obviously. But what was happening is that we were living in a feudal system where there were feudal lords, and then most people were kind of serfs, um, more or less slaves. They would be kind of on a lord's land, and they would be having to sort of pay a lot of what they produced back to the lord, in return for sort of being able to live and work on their land. But actually, there was a lot of stuff going on at that time. There was a lot of unhappiness. People weren't enjoying that system. But there was also a little bit more autonomy than we're led to believe, because there was common land. So there was a possibility that you could go off and be fairly independent, and you could grow crops on common land. So you had women who were growing their own food, growing herbs, acting as midwives, wise women, etc. And there was increasing dissent, and the feudal lords didn't like it at all. So Federici talks about how the whole capitalist project was basically cooked up by the feudal lords. There was a thing called the enclosures of the common land. They took away all of the land and said, no, that's ours. You can't grow your own food. And then, of course, there was institutionalized, the witch hunts. They came after. So any woman who was independent, who had her own property, who wasn't married, wasn't towing the line, like, they would come up, you're a witch. I'm going to put you on trial. I'm going to burn you at the stake, or we're going to duck you in the river until you drown. So it was a sort of systematic terrorizing of women, and it was a deliberate project of isolating women inside houses so that they would basically, for free, produce the workforce that was needed, and increasingly like to work the land. But then, of course, we had the Industrial Revolution. So that is an amazing book, and definitely worth reading. But patriarchy has erupted in all sorts of different places and cultures and society at different times. I think you see it when Naz is talking about when we went to the British Museum and took mushrooms. We were after the exhibition that she's talking about, we went into another exhibition, which was Stonehenge. And it was a beautifully curated experience, but it went from earlier on in the sort of Stone Age, where people were kind of moving around. There were sort of shamans, priests, priestesses, and we walked through the whole exhibition, and at the end you turned a corner and you came into one of the earliest ages of commerce, because after the Stone Age we had the Bronze Age, and suddenly you have the accumulation of wealth, and with the accumulation of wealth and the discovery of metals like iron, the warfare emerged, modern warfare, modern inequality. So you could actually feel, I think, like viscerally, you could feel the atmosphere change as you walked round the corner in the British Museum, from this kind of land and planetary based system, living with the land, in, aligned with the seasons, into this sort of modern society that is all about who's got the most, who's the winner, who's the loser. And I think you can see that popping up through history at all sorts of different times. And with the acquisition of wealth, you start seeing real power struggles and power imbalances. And I think part of that struggle starts to manifest itself in different ways as the oppression of minorities. Not that women are a minority, we're obviously half the world's population, but this is the thing. There is intersectionality here. It's not just about the oppression of women, it's about who can get rich off the labor of other groups.
Yeah. I think what you're really pointing to is the whole idea of power and what power means, because the suggestion there, especially if you go back to like feudal times, is there has always been somebody who has power. And in many ways, it's been about them keeping that power. Obviously it shifts with the times. And I really loved how, I really felt it when you said that you turned the corner and you kind of moved into the Bronze Age, and you could feel the change in the atmosphere. And when you said it, I can really imagine that. It's like, and it brought a word to mind. Actually, it brought the word evolution to mind when you said it, because it's like, even if we think about the most basic cell, or the most basic life, they will always find a way to kind of evolve, and the environment gets more complex. And I think what we see is that because of this desire, or I don't know whether to call it scarcity or fear, or, the desire to keep the power, it causes the oppression as we're moving through the different stages. But in a sense, in a weird way, I kind of feel like it also offers an opportunity for hope as well, because there's only so much you can do if you're moving along this continuum. I just feel like there's only so much you can do before it begins to crumble and not work anymore. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at, and that the whole idea of evolution in its purest sense, to me, is to get better, to kind of build on what isn't working. And obviously this has kind of been, it's been building momentum, and people have been acquiring and wealth or power or privilege or whatever you want to call it, and it's been going to those people who have always been on the top of the food chain. But there's a shift, there's something else emerging, and yeah, so that's the sense that I'm getting from when you're talking.
Absolutely. And I think calling it evolution can be dangerous, because I don't think that patriarchy or capitalism is an evolution of anything. There are a lot of examples of societies that were very sophisticated that weren't based on capitalism or patriarchy, going back thousands and thousands of years AD. But yeah, I think you're right. You look at, what we do know is that if things swing too far one way, there's going to be some kind of natural correction, you would hope. And I do feel that's what we're seeing. Just look at what's all the No Kings gatherings over the weekend in America, where you're like, this is ridiculous. We've got a handful of white male billionaires who are running the world. It's like, surely we something is going to happen. We need to readdress this.
So it was really interesting when you talked about something has to shift, and there's an interesting perspective here in that patriarchy's done such a good job of conditioning us as women and oppressing us and suppressing us. And what happens when you are victimized in this way systematically for generations is that you start to you start to try and defend yourself and lash out. And Rachel talked about extremes. And one extreme that we also notice that also has to be addressed and cannot be ignored is that as women, we are very good at emasculating the masculine. We're very good at, because we've been hurt and oppressed and victimized, at lashing out and trying to bring the masculine down and reducing it to something that is, you know, humiliating and small. And what that does in return is that the men will then, or the masculine then objectifies women. And it's, as soon as you objectify someone, you take away their humanness, right? That's literally what we mean. And that's where you get abuse and violence against women, because they are an object. They are reduced to a bitch. They are reduced to a witch. They are reduced to something that is not the whole person. And in order for there to be a balance, us as women, this is where I talk about, we have so much power. We have so much power to turn the tide around, and that power doesn't come from force. You know, if you look at the forces of nature that are the most powerful, you know, water, for example, over time carves holes in rock, carves chasms, beautiful rivers going through land. You know, water is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. And I think that that is where the feminine flow, we can really learn something here. We can really learn about, okay, what does it look like if instead of emasculating the masculine, we start to see the potential of the masculine and readdress this balance of masculine and feminine, readdress the imbalance of power, right? And recognize how incredible the high masculine can be. And that energy, it's not all about, you know, this is not taking down or you know, wanting to replace patriarchy is not about trying to replace it with something that where the feminine is on top. It's something completely different. It's very, you know, matriarchy is about restoring equality. It is way more egalitarian. But as women, we've got to take this responsibility that yes, we've been conditioned by the patriarchy, but it's also taken us away from our truth. And we are not at our highest, most truthful, absolute power. We are not women who emasculate the masculine. We need to uphold what is beautiful about that. And that is for anyone listening who has men in their life. And of course, we all have men in our life, whether you've got sons, brothers, fathers, you know, access to having a relationship with a male that, you know, where that is their safety. I'm talking generally here. I'm not talking about when someone's putting themselves in the line of fire. If you're in an abusive relationship, that's completely different. But is there a way to start to recognise the truth and the beauty of the masculine? You know, can we see that? Can we start to invite that in? And I think that there lies a real missing element to all of, you know, a lot of the work that we see here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I feel like that's a very sensitive topic for a lot of women, especially because, you know, as you've mentioned, the conditioning that has been happening for generations cross-culturally, and even beyond that, maybe the lived experiences that we've had as well, maybe not even just in relationships, but institutions, workplaces, things like that. So yes, I agree with you actually, Naz. In a recent Substack article, I shared my own experience of integrating the masculine for myself and how challenging that has been for me. And that was from my own religious perspective. I spoke about my relationship with Jesus and God, and how because of everything that's been tied up with that, the idea of, you know, the divine masculine is in a sense quite difficult, and then the human masculine is also quite difficult. So it's kind of like, okay, so I'm supposed to have this relationship with an idea that I've never really developed a healthy understanding of what you would call as a high masculine. And so do I even want to open myself up to that threat, that danger, that sense of unsafety? But I think one of the things I definitely have seen in women's empowerment spaces is we've gotten really good at talking about the feminine and raising and upholding the feminine, and because of the way that we have been treated by society and sometimes by actual real life men, um, it becomes harder to see the beauty in the masculine. Yeah. Um, but I do feel for us to be like what you said, for us to be our most potent, our most empowered creators, there has to be a development, a kind of like a look, at least turning towards that. I mean, I don't think it's a simple thing to do at all. Um, but I do feel like we can't really say that there's a wholeness if we're trying to build something, if it's, yeah.
I get you. If it's one-sided, what we need to do is the scales have been so, unbalanced, out of our favor for so long. Of course, we're going to want to correct that, and our focus is on the feminine. And I think it starts with like bringing into balance the high masculine, the divine masculine. Bringing that into balance is about there's so much attention, isn't there, on masculine figures who are toxic, who are derogatory, disgraceful, just thinking about Andrew Tate. And yet, when we're asked for, is there an example of a high masculine? It's like, we need to start putting in the limelight the men who are upholding this, who are in their energy of high masculine, so that so that women and men can see that this is a possibility, And it's not necessarily the work that Rachel and I do, but a lot of what we do is about understanding that this is work that is going to need to happen. And once we've our whole mission and our whole sort of principle of the business, Women Are the Medicine, is that we are medicine first for ourselves, then we're medicine for each other, and then we're medicine for the world. And that includes men, that includes everyone, that includes us helping one another with our relationships with the masculine. So it's collective work. A lot of what's coming up for people now is that it's hard for them to see the way forwards, and that's because this is completely new territory. It's uncharted. We don't have experience of matriarchy in our recent lineages. It goes way back. We're talking thousands of years. There are a few tribes left in the world who do have matriarchal structures, but for the most part, we don't really know what it looks and feels like. So we're finding our way, and when we're stumbling in the dark here, we've got to rely on one another to be each other's lanterns and to share what we know and share these perspectives and have safe spaces to have some of these conversations. Like, what could it look like? Because I don't want to live in a world where men feel like they're treading on eggshells if they want to say something. It's like, no, it can't be swapping sides here. We've got to create a level playing field for everyone.
I do think also, I mean, patriarchy does not serve anyone, does not serve men. Men are conditioned from so little to be basically shut off from the neck down. When you talk about the body, it's like so many men are like unable to really feel their feelings, let alone act on them. And it makes me think of, when we talk about like who are the men who are amazing, who are doing this work as well. I mean, I always think first of all of I absolutely love him. There's a therapist called Terry Real who's got an amazing book, Us, which is about the power of interconnected, co-created relationship. And he's a couples counselor, basically, is his background. But he himself says, I was raised by a violent father and he was raised by a violent father. but my sons are not going to say that about me, because I did the work, and it's like plugged himself back into his body, into his feeling self, and is doing the most incredible work out here in the world. So I think, like, that there's men and women either side of this who I think are exemplary, and showing us, God, there's just a much more
Human.
productive, human, embodied, empowered way to do this.
I agree. Naz, what do you think?
Like I said, I think people can't see that it's a possibility because they don't have a lived experience of it. And we're so conditioned by this, right? We're so... And this, we'll talk about this from a very basic sense of what we think is possible for us in our life is based on not our imagination, but which as women we stunt and we limit. And even as human beings, we also stunt and limit that. But if we can just imagine a better world, what would that look like? If we can play in those realms, if we can lose our attachment to some of the things, some of the conditioning and the capitalist systems and structures that have us thinking that life has to be like this. And in fact, like Rachel says, why? Why does it have to be like this? Why can't we have a completely different way of living? Why can't we go back to community and village living instead of that individualistic, nuclear family that doesn't serve anyone apart from the patriarchal system? Why can't we? We can do what the fuck we want. It's exactly the same in our individual lives. If we want to create a life that we love, we have to have a vision for it. Right, this is what Rachel was saying earlier about some of the women that we work with don't appear to have a vision. They're problem solving. They're so busy with juggling so many things that what they're doing is their attention is going on to whatever obstacle is in front of them at that moment. And the trouble with that is not a creative life. That is a problem solving life. When you can vision what it is that you want, especially from a felt sense perspective, right? I want to live somewhere that is spacious. I want to have a business that makes me feel alive. I want to have a business where I use my creativity, right? You can feel it as a felt sense, even if you don't have the specificity yet. You can start to hone that into a vision. And when you have a vision and you know what it might even feel like, then you will start to your brain will start to look for opportunities to bring that into reality, right? So it's the basics of deliberately creating your life. Some people call it manifestation. We call it deliberate creation. What is it that you want? How do you want to feel? Let's keep you focused on that. What has to change? And the trouble is, usually a lot has to change, right? So I'd rather stay safe and familiar and not change stuff because I don't know if it's going to work, is usually what happens. But when someone is awakened to their power and they start stretching their wings, and whether it's because they're working with a coach or they're taking some risks or they're microdosing or something's happened, they've had an epiphany and they've just decided something, life starts to change and reorganize around you. So if that's the case for us as individuals, why is that not the case for us collectively, right? Why can't we design something that works for communities, not works for the whole world? We don't need to have one system that works for the whole world. How about we have systems that work for here and now, for this particular community and this collective, and let it evolve and let it grow, and not have, the masculine way is I've got to have it all figured out, and then I'm going to plan it and I'm going to architect it and I'm going to map it. And the feminine way and nature's way of evolution is let's see what's needed. Right? Oh, I'm going to need thicker fur because it's colder. Right, this animal is going to start to grow thicker fur. I'm going to start to have to control the river. So beavers are actually going to control their environment. They've learned to do that. That's evolution. We're more intelligent than beavers. We can do this too, We can adapt to our environment and to the system. If we just let go of that rigidity of our mind, which is where, for us, Florence, psychedelics can be very, very helpful. To help widen someone's perspective, to help them break through those rigid neural pathways that has them, like a horse that's been blinkered, just driving forwards. You take the blinkers off and you've got a whole new world available to you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you. That's a really great place to bring the conversation to a close. Like going back to the idea that yes, there are ways that even though it might feel hard to make those changes, that with the right support, it is possible to reduce the anxiety, to reduce the fear, to take the grip off the conditioning so that you can step into your most creative and empowered self. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Florence. We're in it together. We'll get there together.
We are. So can you tell us where we can find you?
The best place at the moment, as you've described earlier, is Substack, because Rachel is taking all of our work and our ideas and our perspectives and the work that we do with women and the kind of world that we want to create and crafting these incredible long form articles. And on there you'll find our podcast as well, where we interview women who've got something the world want to say. But if someone wants to work with us, they can visit womenarethemedicine.co, which is our website, and it's got details on there. We currently have a mastermind and a one-on-one coaching container called From Force to Flow that is for female visionaries and entrepreneurs who know that there's a different way to even redefine success, but to be successful, right? To have income, but to have impact and inner peace as well. And that's what those two containers are designed for, is to really support women in that kind of transformation.
I'll put all the details in the show notes anyway, so they'll be able to find you. You've been listening to the Awakening Woman Ready to Thrive. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to take part in our special launch giveaway. You could win a spot in either the Awakening Path or Create Chicks Rising, and everyone who enters will receive a beautiful thank you bundle featuring resources and gifts from incredible women across my community. Entering is simple, and all the details are in the show notes. And if you'd like to contribute a resource to the thank you bundle or support the podcast in another way, just reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Most of all, thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next episode.